from last week. 2 weeks ago. Last week, Monday, we were out of town. And it's a Maamar of the Friedrich, it's a Maamar of the Rebbe from Yud Shvat Tavshim Mem Daled, where he explains chapter Yud Daled 14 in the Friedrich Rebbe's Maamar of באתי Legani. And over there in that Maamar, in that chapter particularly, he speaks about the idea how the Ohr Ein Sof, the infinite light of Hashem, comes down to the lowest most levels, all the way down into our world, all the way down even into lower than our worlds, and it's in a way of Ohr, in a way that it's not affected by the world, just like Ohr, when it comes down, is not affected. And we spoke about there's three things called Ohr, Chayis, and Koyach. Koyach becomes separated, power, just like when I throw something, so the energy leaves my hand, for example, and then pushes the item. Then there's a level of Chayis. Chayis is a Chayis Pnimi, like a vitality that comes from my neshama to give the hand its energy, or to be able to move my hand, and so on. And then there's Ohr that is higher than that is all over equally, just like the light of the sun is not impressed by or affected by wherever it shines. The same way Hashem shines and is revealed all over in a way of Ohr. So now the Rebbe is going to bring in that there's another important part that is involved in the creation process, in the Chayis of the worlds, and that is called the name. Hashem's name is also a power and an energy and vitality, not Hashem's name, but the names of all the creations is part of the vitality and energy that comes from Hashem to give them life. So that's what we're holding now. Ois Hey, line 13. But we need to understand in the godly life force and vitality that's to be found in the creations, there's a fourth level, Bechinas Shem, the level of the name. Like it's known, the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, that's brought down in the part of Tanya called Shayichet V'Emunah, that speaks about how Hashem is involved in creating all beings all the time. So he says over there that everything was created with the Asara Mamaris, the 10 utterances. But even though in the Asara Mamaris, in the 10 utterances, it only says like 10 general categories. There should be light, there should be growing things, there should be animals, there should be birds. There's no names given for every specific item in creation. So, fine, we have the energy and vitality for the big picture of creation. But where do we get the energy and vitality for each individual creation, for each individual being? So the Alter Rebbe explains, let's look in line 16, he explains over there in Shayichet V'Emunah, that the names of all creations and all creatures in the world, these are the very letters of speech, that they descend by means of a chain descent from the 10 utterances in the Torah. How do they come out of the 10 utterances in the Torah? It says in the Torah, Yehi Ohr. It doesn't say anything about any other individual item. It doesn't say about rocks. It doesn't say about specific types of minerals, a diamond, a particular type of flower, etc., etc. So he says, through the different changes and exchanges of letters, there are different ways how, according to Torah, letters can be changed for other letters. The one that we're most familiar with is gematrias, where we say that the gematria, let's say, of the word va'ed, like Baruch Shem Kvod Machus Elon Va'ed, I'm sorry, not the gematria of that. The gematria of one word is the same gematria like another word. So in a certain type of Seder Ishtalshlos, you could take a word from the Asara Amaris, or a combination of words, and then change it for its gematria, and then you'll have another word which is the chayis of a particular thing that's not listed in the Asara Amaris. And there's other types of changes of letters where letter Aleph can be switched for a Taf, and letter Beis can be switched for a Shin, and letter Gimel for a Reish, etc. And there's many other types of ways of the switching around of letters of the Aleph Beis, things that have to do from the same area of the throat, like the letters Aleph, Ches, Hey, Ayin come from the throat, so they all can be switched around. Be that as it may, there's many ways how Pitoida certain letters can be changed for other letters. And then, from that you have, by all these different types of ishtalshalos, the evolutions, you can come from the Asara Amaris to lesser beings, because the Asara Amaris is a very general type of category, all growing things, all animals, all birds, etc., etc. And then, when you break it down, and you need to have the chayis for every individual thing, that you have the different breakdowns and the different gematrias and so on. And then he goes on, line 19. It's known also the teaching of the Mizrach Magid on the Pasuk. V'choil asher yikra loy ha'adam nefesh chaya hu shmoi. It's the Mizrach Magid is saying that there's a very strange type of expression. I mean, it's really based on a medrash, but it's a very type of strange expression that all that Adam Rishon called it a living soul, that is its name. So what is this? Should have said that Adam called a name to all living souls. What's the idea that he called whoever he called, so then the living soul is his name? So Mishkan Magid says, the name is the life, the living soul of that animal. The different names that Adam Rishon called all the creations. For example, the Medrash says that Adam Rishon says, this animal, that's appropriate, an ox, it's appropriate to call him by the Hebrew name Shoir. That Hebrew word, Shoir, Hey Machai Shalem, that is the life force and vitality. Now, the names were not done arbitrarily. Valpiza, according to this idea, that what Mizrach Magid says, that the names that Adam Rishon called, that was their actual life force and vitality of that particular animal. So, according to this, Maamar Shiur explains what the Chazal say. The Kriyas Hashem is Shala Adam Rishon Hois Hayra Al Goyl Chachmasai. That the names that Adam Rishon called the different animals was an indication on Adam Rishon's great wisdom. To such a degree, the Chazal say, this was the way Hashem proved to the Malachim that that the Adam Rishon's Chachma is greater than your Chachma. The Malachim were saying, why do you care about a person to create him? So he asked the Malachim, can you call the animals by their names? The Malachim were at a loss. Then he said, Adam Rishon, can you call the animals by their names? He says, yeah, this one's appropriate to call Shoir, this one's appropriate to call a different name. So we see that this was a very deep capability that he was able to do. The fact that Adam Rishon called every animal by its names, etc., who makes a hisig v'yada hashoyre shall call minu min. It's because he comprehended and he knew the root of every different species, and therefore he could call an ox by the Hebrew name Shoir. And the Rebbe goes on to say, that the Mizrach Magid explains over there, In a similar vein, it's also concerning names of human beings. Hainu loidak shem amin, not only that the species name is connected with the chayis of the species, so therefore ox is called by the Hebrew name Shiur because the species energy, the species of oxen, they get their chayis through the three Hebrew letters of Shin Vav Reish, but also Adam, which is, for example, Adam, which is the name of the species, Elagam Hashem es Protim, but also a people's individual names, Sheshmoy HaProti Shekol Echad Ve'echad Chayusoi, that the individual name that each person has, that is its life force and vitality. The Rebbe says a very interesting chiddush that I do not remember seeing anywhere else. Just like the above mentioned applies concerning the name of everything, whether it's the species name, whether it's the individual's name that he's called in Lashon Kodesh, which is actually the expression that Alter Rebbe uses in Tanya. Shmoy asher yikru lo b'Lashon HaKodesh, the name that is called in Lashon HaKodesh, it's his chayes. So the Rebbe says it's not just limited to the Hebrew name. What happens to things that don't have a name in Lashon Kodesh? Just because some people arbitrarily in the last 100 or 200 years, Eliezer ben Yehuda decided to make up names in Hebrew that doesn't make it Lashon Kodesh. So there's many things that do not have names in Lashon Kodesh. They have names in other languages. Al derech zeh hu belgam b'negeh la'Hashem shebalaz. Similar to this is also concerning the different names that things are called in other languages. Computer, monitor, whatever. Since all things are by divine providence, and the fact that people call this by a certain name, that means that there must be some spiritual connection between the name and the item that they're calling by this name. And the Rebbe brings a proof from the writings of his father, because one of the things that the Rebbe started doing in the later years of Baty Legani is not just quoting from older Rabbein, starting Baal Shem Tov, Mzitcher Magid, the Alter Rebbe, but in the later years the Rebbe also started including his father in every single Baty Legani Maamar to quote something from him. So he says, like we find in the Sfarim of my father, in many, many places, he examines carefully, he analyzes also the names of other languages. He derives from them new matters and lessons and directives in the service of Hashem. The place of his exile was called Kshiali or something similar to that. And if it's spelled in Lashon Kodesh, it's Sadik, Yud, Aleph, Lamed. So he says it's the word sail, shadow, and he explains the whole thing that we derive from it and so on. When Nimtza comes out, Shachai is Holakisha B'Kol Nivraim. What's the point of all of this? That the divine life and energy in all creations, Shalzen Namar Va'atam Achayas Kulam. Concerning this it says, and you give life to everything. Who gives life? What is that divine force and energy that gives life to everything? Who b'chinas Shem is the level of Hashem's name. Now, that seems to be something different than what we were talking about before, how the Va'ata Machayas Kulam is going on the level of Hashem's light, of the oil. We need to understand, how does this fit in with what's explained in the continuations of the Maamarim of the one who's sent, whose stalkus we are marking, the Mashrakos, the word says, Va'atem Chayes Kulam Koya La'or V'Achayis, that the Frierdiker Rebbe says in his Baty Legani, that where it says, you give life to all, it's referring to the light of the Eibishter and the vitality of the Eibishter. Seemingly, it's not the level of the name. And soon we're going to explain that there's actually a problem with the name that makes it completely distinct and different than the level of Oyer and Chayes. That's what he's going to approach now in the second paragraph on the page, line 19. To move on, even more it's not understood. According to what it's known, that according to what it's known, that the level of light of Hashem, and in a similar vein, close to the level of light is the level of Chayes, as opposed to name, is two opposites. And he's going to explain why are they opposite. The level of light and even the level of vitality and life force is all in a way of revelation, like he explained about, like he spoke about earlier in the Maamar. That the light that comes out of, let's say, the luminary. So he explained earlier that when you look at the light, you can tell what the luminary is like. If you look at sunlight, you could tell that's coming from the sun. If you're looking at light coming out of a candle, you could tell that this is coming from a candle, because light is about revelation. Even chayes, let's say the chayes, the vitality of the soul, it indicates the life of the soul. It's connected to and is associated with the soul. But when you talk about name is just the opposite. It doesn't show anything to one who's not an expert like other magician, but an ordinary person, it doesn't show anything. Line 22, Makshenkin Shem Hu Bechinas Helam, as opposed to the level of name, is in a state of concealment. Now he's going to explain what I started saying before. The idea of revelation is specifically in light. Light is similar to the luminary. Through the light one can comprehend and can grasp the quality of the greatness of the luminary that this light is emanating from. For example, the differences between candlelight, torchlight, moonlight, or sunlight. The difference, for example, between candlelight and torchlight, that is indicative of the differences between the luminary, where the candlelight is coming versus where the torchlight is coming. As opposed to name, you look at a person's name, you cannot tell what a person is about by just looking at his name. There are many people that are called by the very same name. Still in all not similar to each other, not intellectually, not in other character traits, not emotionally, etc., etc. You say them as even more so. That's the private name. What about the species name? Like we said before, Shiur, that other magician said, I see by being able to tell where your life force is, I can see that you're supposed to be called by the name Shiur in Hebrew, Shin Vav Reish. The name Shiur shows even more on the idea of the life force and vitality. It's still in all, it conceals that life force. How do we know it conceals it? From the very fact that Hashem praised Adam Rishon to the Malachim and said, you see, he can call them by the name. That Adam Rishon knew how to call the names of the different animals. Shall call Nivra, because he did recognize the root of the life force of every creation. So we must say that it's not something that's evident. You need someone of great wisdom like Adam Rishon. If the name would shine in a revealed way, like the light is, what is so great is wisdom that Adam Rishon recognized and saw, give a look, this is called an ox. Everybody can see that. That's called a Shiur. From this, it's obvious that the ray that's to be found in the name, the ray of godly life force and vitality, that gives life to a particular species, gam b'shem amin, is concealed. It says that Adam Rishon also said to Hashem, after Adam Rishon called all the animals by their names, so Hashem turned to Adam Rishon and said, what is appropriate to call me? So he said, it's appropriate to call Adonai. Because you are a master over all your creatures. So again we see, who told Hashem this? Adam Rishon. Why? Because he was a Chacham. The need specifically for Adam Rishon to use his Chachma to teach, to say this, because this is concealed. This idea of the concealment of the name, we could say, this is also what's brought down in the name of the Arizal, also in inanimate things, in inorganic things, like rocks, there is a spiritual life and vitality and soul. What is the intention when he's saying, even in something that's really a doimim? What's the doimim mamish? Also something that is inanimate in the spiritual sense. What does that mean? So he explains in line 12, all the creations, the way they are, because of their essential state, they show and reveal the godly life force that is in them. The creations themselves say, that they have a godly life force. They manifest it. You see that they somehow connect to something more spiritual than their physical parts. Similar to what's known, every creature says, sings songs of praise to the Eibishter. But because the many concealments and coverings, there are such creations like the ones in our world that are in a state that they're inanimate, meaning they do not reveal, they do not express the godly life force that's in them. Concerning this, the Alter Rebbe says in Shar Yichud V'Emunah, also something that's really inanimate. Those creations that are silent, that do not proclaim, that do not show any godliness and vitality to them. You look at a rock, you don't see that they have any life whatsoever. Yesh b'chinas nefesh.
Recording in progress.
Yesh b'chinas nefesh v'chayes ruchnis. There is a spiritual soul and a spiritual life force in them. One second. Sorry about that. We're holding line 22. In continuation to this, Mevayer explains life force and vitality of all creations is the names that they are called by them, that the name is concealed. So we see even something that is inanimate, meaning it is something that completely conceals any type of aspect of a life force, still in all, the name comes and gives it life. So we see that the name is different than Oir. Oir is about revelation, Shem is about concealment. So the problem is, how do we fit this in with what the Frierdiker Rebbe explains in his Maamar? But in the continuation of the Maamarim that the Frierdiker Rebbe explains, that Maamar that he gave out for his yahrzeit, that which comes down to give life and bring into existence all the creations, is a ray of godly light. Oirdaik, specifically light. It's a state of revelation. Like it's also understood from what he brings concerning this, what it says in the end of Tanya, in the Geras HaKodesh, chapter 20, that array of that thin line that came out from the Ein Sof and the infinite light of Hashem is in all created beings, in all formed beings, in all made beings. In other words, Bri Yitzir Asiyah. That emphasizes, when you talk about array, it's emphasized the idea of revelation. The fact that the line and the thin line brings into being things, something from nothing. Though we say that the coming into being of something from nothing is only by the power of Hashem's essence. Hashem's essence, its being, comes from its very own self. The same thing when you have to create the yesh me'ayin, our world, that imagines itself to come from itself, it can only come from that aspect of Hashem, from Hashem's very essence that truly comes from itself. So how does the Kav actually do that? There's a line that comes down and is the means through which Atzmus brings our world into being. That's because the line comes from the infinite light of Hashem. That the light is similar to the luminary. That the luminary, its being, comes from itself, like it's explained over there in Tanya. From this it's understood also the ray of the ray of the ray of that thin line that's in all creations, and v'noitz and v'nasim, and all formed things and all made things. That gives them life and brings them into being from nothing to something. He is similar to the luminary, the level of revelation. So therefore, the question is, how does that fit in with the idea that the vitality of all the creations comes from the level of a name, which name shows on concealment? So he goes on to say, Moisav Levi continues to explain, and he adds in this, in the continuation of Amarim that the Frierdiker Rebbe gave out for his yahrzeit, that the light and the life force of Hashem shines and is drawn down also in the lowest, most levels. Like it says in the pasuk, if I spread out the heavens, over there you are, and I spread out the grave, there you are. That the revelation of Hashem's life force and vitality is not just the heavens, like it says that the heavens relate the glory of Hashem, but also in the ground, even in the grave, the life force and vitality of Hashem is revealed. Like it continues over there in the Maamar the Frierdiker Rebbe, that's in the capability of every single person, even the most simplest person, to know this, how Hashem is present and revealed everywhere, like we mentioned before. So to answer this seeming dichotomy between these two things of Oir and Shem, the Rebbe is going to bring in there are certain advantages in Shem, in a name, over the idea of Oir. Even though name seems to be distant, but a name can do things that even light cannot do. So he says in line 13, Oizvav, in the Kudus Abir, the point of the explanation, this is, Sha'inin, Shechayas, and Nivroim, Ugam Bechin Hashem, the idea that the life and vitality of created beings is also in the level of the name. Kimavur, B'shar Yichad V'Amun, like it's explained in Shayich D'Amunam, that's because there's an advantage in a name over light. What is the advantage of a name over light? The idea behind this is, which is Adna Marash, the Maamar Chazal. Like the Rebbe Marash explains in the Maamar Chazal, Halach HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mahalach Chamish Me'ez Shana Liknis Loishem. Hashem traveled a distance that would take to walk 500 years to acquire a name. The simple meaning is that it's brought down that the distance between the earth and the heavens is 500 years walking, whatever that means. It's obviously a spiritual idea. And Hashem traveled that distance to acquire a name, in the simple sense, to be able to become known. But in the deeper sense, according to Chassidus, to be able to attain the special quality that a name has. Because the root of a name is higher than the root of light. What does that mean? The idea of light, even though it's cleaving to the luminary, and it's similar to the luminary, like we said before. These are the two aspects and components of light, that it cannot be separated from the luminary, and it reflects and shows on the luminary, like we said before. It is only a ray of it, it's not the essence of it. As opposed to a name, though it is separated in the state of concealment, it's rooted in the very essence, therefore it draws down the very essence. Like we see, heaven forbid, with a person that faints, there's no, the life force and vitality when the person faints does not expand in his body. It's concealed, and all it remains is the essence of the soul. But what do we see? Through calling him by his name, you could bring his soul back. How is that possible? Through calling the person by his name, we draw down the essence. So we see that the name has a deeper connection than the light has to the luminary. You say to Mizumatzinu, even more so, we find even in the calling by the individual names of the powers, we draw them down from their essential root and their essential source. Chassidus talks about that when you approach a person and you ask him for help, you tell him, "You're so kind, I'm sure you could help me out with this," and so on. We're not just flattering the person, or we're asking someone, "Please explain me this difficult topic. I know you're such a sage, you're so wise." Again, it's not a matter of flattery, but when we call him by that name, in other words, we are using that description of Chacham, a sage, a Chazdan, a kind person, that itself, just like when you call a person by their given name, it draws down the soul from a state of concealment if he faints. The same thing by calling a person a sage, calling the person a kind person, we elicit, we evoke, we bring out from the depth of their being that characteristic of wisdom and kindness. Line 29. It's explained in Torah. Through calling a person by the name wise and kind, we draw down the power of wisdom and kindness from their essential concealment. That is what a human being. In a similar vein, Chassidus explains, is the reason why in davening we describe Hashem's wisdom and we describe Hashem's kindness, to elicit and evoke by Hashem His wisdom and His kindness as well. Last line on the page. So too, it's above by calling Hashem by the name wise and kind. We awaken and we inspire. That He should emanate light in the sphere of Chachma and in the sphere of Chesed. Even though Chachma and Chesed, kindness and wisdom, is something that Hashem created, they weren't even there in a state of concealment. Therefore, sometimes it's explained the Kriyas Hashem is Magas Gam Lamaila Mesospheres Agnuzas, that calling Hashem by His name and descriptions reaches a level that is higher even than the 10 concealed spheres of Hashem, because this is what brings them out. To be even in a state of concealment, it comes when we call that out. How much more so if we're talking about the individual soul powers, getting back to the person. That when we call a person a chacham, we call him a chassid, we are evoking those particular characteristics. So too concerning a person's given name. Reuven, Shimon, Shalomaylo Yosem Hashem Chacham v'Chassid. These names that a person's given name is higher than the name, the descriptive name of a chacham or a chassid. Through calling the person by his name, we draw down the essence. While Pisa moving according to this understood. That the godly life force of all the creations is also in the level of name. Like it's explained in Shari Yichd V'Munam, even though a name is in a state of concealment, so seemingly it's less than oil, less than light. So he says in line 11, because there's an advantage and a quality in a name that's not to be found in light. The light, even though it is similar to the luminary, like we said, the candle shows, the candle light shows that it's a candle, and sunlight indicates that it's sun. So still in all, it's only a ray. How much more so the life force that comes down in a level of light in all the created beings, in all the formed beings, in all the made beings, which means in all the entities in the worlds of Bri, Yetzira, Asiya, in addition to the fact that it's only the light of Hashem's thin line. In the light of the kav, it's only a ray of a ray of a ray alone. And that's the advantage of the level of name, that it reaches the level of Hashem's essence. So now we're going to bring it down to and connect it to what we spoke about before about Tzivus Havaya. Why are Yidden called Tzivus Havaya? Because the tzivos, the hosts, is referring to the many sparks that were hidden in Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim got its chayis, its shoyrish of the chayis of Mitzrayim was from the name Elikim, and now by the Yidden collecting all the items from Mitzrayim, they brought it out and they elevated all the sparks that were concealed in under the Mitzrayim, which got its life force and vitality from the name Elikim. So instead, now it brought it up, Tzivos Havaya, it became the hosts of, and became elevated to Shem Yudke Vovke. So he says in line 18, we can connect this to what was explained previously. In the quality of elevating and refining the sparks of Mitzrayim, they were initially in the utmost state of concealment and covering. These sparks that were hidden in Mitzrayim is similar to the concealment that's to be found, that a name does not, even though it's a source of life, the life force is not evident in the name. Even though it's a level of a name, it still has an advantage over the light, that specifically through it one reaches the essence. In the same way, these sparks, even though they're embedded in Mitzrayim, and they're so low, and they're so concealed, they have a very high level, a very high source, that the Yidden tap into that when they elevate it. This is also what the Tzemach Tzedek writes in the Maamar entitled by the pasuk that Pari sent the nation. The L'chura Havalel Maamar as Yisrael seemingly should have said Vahi b'shalach Pari as Yisrael. Yisrael is a higher descriptive name. Actually, the Rashi brings this down and so on. The Mefarshim say that when the Torah uses the word just the people, it's indicating often a low level. So it should have said Vahi b'shalach Pari as it said Vahi b'shalach Pari as Yisrael or Bnei Yisrael. Mao is lashon oimemis. What's the idea of which it's Chassidus relates it to the words of coals that are extinguished. Mevayer, Tzemach Tzedek explains, Shai Yisrael begols Mitzrayim ksiv. When the Yidden were in the exile of Mitzrayim, it says, Uzratia li ba'aretz, I planted her in the ground. The Yidden were like embedded and concealed in the golus of Mitzrayim and covered over, that their true nature and the true being was not revealed. But they're called planted. And when we're talking about planting has a purpose of having a greater growth after the planting. Vom Razal, the Chazal said, does not a person plant a small amount of a saw just to be able to derive many times as much, many kur, which has many saws in this. The Hainu, this means to say, al derech hayidu, similar to where it's known, be'inyan shah Torah mitzvahs nikrais b'shem zriyah. Torah mitzvahs is also called planting, or sowing. Not with an E, with an O, S-O-W. V'hainu shah mitzvahs nizru b'Yisrael, the mitzvahs were planted or sown in the Yidden. Shenamar that bahem, concerning the Yidden it says, Kisiyu atam li eretz chayfetz, you are to me a land of desire. So we are a land, we are an earth in which the Torah mitzvahs is planted. Like the teaching of Baal Shem Tov, that in every single Yid yesh oitzris nailim, there are great treasures. Bedugmas ha'oitzris shabaretz hagashmi is just like the treasures that are concealed in the physical earth of gold, silver, diamonds, and so on. But we only have to reveal it with these great treasures that's in every Yid. So why are Yidden called the land of desire? It's referring to the Yidden the way they are down here below. They are called and likened to the earth. And only through them the mitzvahs being planted in the Yidden, through that becomes the growth, which is so much greater than the Torah mitzvahs are on their own. In a similar way, when we say that the Yidden were planted in Golus Mitzrayim, it's for the sake of growth, through the refining of the sparks in Mitzrayim, that were initially in a state of total concealment and covering. Only through this concealment and covering, where it's added a much greater quality and height in the Yidden, they reached much greater heights. Similar to the advantage of a name over light, because only in the concealment of the name do you draw down the essence, whereas the light doesn't pull down the luminary kenisker le'el, like was mentioned earlier. Oisches, line 16. Amnam kivim she'inyan Hashem u'bchinas ha'elam, since the idea of a name is in a state of concealment. Lachein inyan ze gufa miles Hashem is gal idea oir. This very thing of the quality of the name becomes revealed through the light. The light shines a light on something that's concealed. From this also understood concerning the godly life force that's in the creations. Since the godly life force that's in the level of a name, that's in the names of the creations, are concealed, therefore we also need the life force that's in the level of a light, that's in a revealed state. Through this becomes revealed also the life force and vitality that's in the level of the name. Then there's both advantages. Also the essence that's in the name that's usually concealed, it comes out revealed. So we need both. We can't just have the name alone because the name is a state of concealment. We can't just have the light alone because the light doesn't pull down the essence. When we bring light and name together, so then the light shines a light on the name and we see and reveal that which the name draws down. Through this we effect that both Hashem's name is complete and the way it is written, Yud Kei Vav Kei, that's how it's pronounced, not like now that Yud Kei Vav Kei is pronounced Aleph Dal Nun Yud, and Hashem's throne is complete, like we learned at the end of parts of B'Shalach, B'Yachdim Shleimus Aham, along with the perfection of the nation, Shleimus HaTorah, the completion of the Torah, Shleimus Eretz Yisrael, and the completion of Eretz Yisrael. All of them should be whole and complete. Shenikras B'Shem Eretz. Why is it called Eretz? The word Eretz is related to the word Rotzin. The land is called land because the word Eretz is related to the Hebrew word Rotza. She wanted to do the will of her maker. The explanation of the meaning of the word that she wanted to do is not just from the word will, it's also from the word running. Another word that's related to is running, rushing. Though the level of Eretz, earth, corresponds to the sphere of Malchus, which is a state of concealment and covering, the Kabbalah oil, therefore we need to have the avoida of Kabbalah oil. Because since godliness is concealed, and since godliness is concealed, so we just have to do things like a soldier does, like we mentioned before. That's the idea of an army. An army just does things with Kabbalah oil because they're told to do so. We call Maamar still in all. He's a gamba if shall reach a laser. It's still in the way of running to do the will of his maker. By days that and through running, even though we're doing it just with Kabbalah oil, through running we are zoichim laritzel lekras agula mitzvah shlema de Mashiach tzedkenu. We are merit to run towards the true redemption, the complete redemption through Mashiach. B'nareinu v'zkanenu, with our youth and our elderly goymer, b'vaneinu v'naseinu, with our sons and our daughters, v'meinu mamish, speedily in our days, mamash.
Recording stop.